Welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard. Tonight we will discuss Parsha Tazria, which we will be reading this coming Shabbat. In Tazria, there are really only two subjects dealt with. 90% of the portion is about the skin disease called tzaraat. This was a spiritual disease that manifests physically in the skin, but we're told that it was brought on because of spiritual reasons. I recorded a whole living with the times, and hopefully people will be able to hear more about that. But the beginning is the idea of when a woman conceives and gives birth to either a male child or a female child, what is the procedure at the time of the temple? And here, if it's a male child, so it mentions about circumcision. This is really the first time that circumcision is mentioned since it was commanded to Avram, way back in Parshat Lech Lecha, in Bereshit, in the book of Genesis. But here we're told that if a woman gives birth to a male child, on the 8th day, the child will be circumcised. And then it talks about the period of purification afterwards. And then it goes into the discussion of this skin disease called tzaraat. So we know that one of the most important and sometimes mysterious things about the Torah is the juxtaposition of different passages in the Torah, or different mitzvot, one next to the other. Sometimes they're very obvious, they don't need any explanation. And other times there's no explanation and they seem to have nothing to do with each other. You'll have a string of mitzvot. And so one of the things that the commentaries always try to deal with is what is the meaning of the juxtaposition. So here in our Torah portion, where we really only have two subjects that are being dealt with, so the question is, what's the connection between the two? Because on the surface, at least, it doesn't seem that a woman giving birth has anything to do necessarily with the skin disease called tzaraat. So our first insight tonight will try to show the meaning of the juxtaposition here. And so first we could just see it in the letters of the words themselves. That is we'll call it the big hint here, is Tazria literally means to give seed. And again, in Living of the Times this week, there's a whole section about the meaning of Tazria and what we can learn from it. In the Art Scroll, it's translated as conceives. When a woman conceives and gives birth to, in the beginning, it's a male child, and then circumcision, and then to a female child. So the word Tazria is based on the word seed, zera. That's why the literal translation and the way the sages understood it, it literally means to give seed. So the word zera is Zayin Resh Ayin. The root of the skin disease called tzaraat is Sadi Resh Ayin. So here, first of all, the two last letters of both words are the same, Resh and Ayin. And the first letter, they almost sound the same, and they're coming from the same place in the mouth. That means Kabbalistically, they can be exchanged one for the other. Zera, tzara. They're very, very similar. So already we see there's a very, very deep connection here. So in both words, the two last letters, resh and ayin, is the word for evil, ra. And yet, when you switch the letters and you put the ayin first, it's awaken. And so first, let's look at Tazria, the conception of a child. And so just as a preview for the Living with the Times, which hopefully everyone will get to, excuse me, so the sages say, and again, they translate Tazria as to give seed. And so in what's called clean language, and this is from the Talmud, that when a woman is aroused sexually first in intimate relations, meaning she experiences orgasm first, then she will give birth to a male child. And if the man reaches orgasm first, it will be a female child. Now, it's not clear at all that what the sages meant was that in every single case, this would be the result. They were making what's called a drasha. They were making a metaphorical, allegorical, symbolic understanding of the verse. And I'm not going to go into it now because that's what the Living with the Times is about, is what's the deeper meaning of what's called the awakening from above and the awakening from below. But here we see it in the word for zera and tzara, is you have resh ayin, which means evil, but when you switch it around, it means awaken. And so, as we'll see shortly, this reminds us of the tzaraat tov v'ra, because awakening is a good thing. And ra here means evil. And so here in Tazria, we're dealing with sexuality. And we can see that in many, many cases, the use of sexuality leads to not such good things. On the other hand, as we're going to see in our second insight tonight, proper marital relations is considered a very high spiritual act. So here you have in the word zera, seed, you have both possibilities of sexuality. You have the spiritual awakening that is manifest in a physical act, or we know that what's called stam sex in many times leads to not such good things. So here, let's look at the word tzara, the root of tzaraat, the skin disease that comes from a spiritual malady in the person, and then it becomes manifest in their physical body. So here we have the same thing, is we usually conceive of illness as something very negative, not good, ra. And again, if we switch the letters, it's air. And we can see, though, that sometimes illness is what's called a wake-up call. It's the body is telling us there's something wrong here. The way you're treating me is not working. You need to change your lifestyle. You need to change the way you are relating to health and your body. And so in many cases, an onset of illness can actually, in the long run, save someone's life. So here we see it in the root of the word for being sick. Someone who's sick in Hebrew is choleh. And the same root, the chet and the lamed, choleh, is the same letters for what's called weakness, chalash. So when the body becomes weak, it gets sick. And both of the roots for these words, chalash and choleh, and a disease is called a machala. It's all based on this root of chet lamed. We see that the same root of chet lamed means exactly the opposite. Strength is called chayal. And the expression is, may you go from strength to strength. Michayel l'chayel. And in Hebrew, a soldier is called a chayal. A woman of valor, a strong, positive woman is called eshet chayil. So here we have, just like we saw with Ra and Er, when you have letters, they can sometimes have opposite meanings. But here it's even without switching them. Just chet lamed is the root of sickness, but it's also the root of strength. And so this goes along with the idea that I just mentioned, that sometimes when the body reacts, if we interpret it correctly, and we don't just treat the symptoms, but we see my body is telling me something. I'm not getting enough sleep. I'm too stressed. I'm not eating properly. I'm not exercising. I'm under pressure all of the time. All of these things affect very deeply our body. And so sometimes when we get sick, if we take the right wake-up call and we remedy that which is causing the sickness, and here that's the connection with tzaraat altogether, is the Torah is telling us is that ultimately disease is coming from spiritual sources. Those are the factors that are hidden from view, but that is what is causing much of, especially modern disease. Again, everyone is welcome to watch the Living with the Times this week, because I deal with all of this in much greater detail. So there is a verse that says, Eit tzara liYaakov, umimena yivashea. It is a time of trouble, tzara. Tzara, again, is the root of this skin disease, tzaraat. And this verse, which is not talking about the skin disease, tzara just means a time of trouble, of pain, of dissension. It's a time of trouble for Yaakov, and from it, he will be saved. So the context is that God will save Yaakov when he's in a state of trouble. But the literal meaning here is, if you just read it very literally, is it's a time of trouble from Yaakov, and from it, meaning, and from the trouble itself will come the redemption or the salvation. So this is really what we've been saying about the positive possibilities of looking at being sick, is that from the sickness itself, we learn what we have to learn and hopefully rectify it. And from the sickness itself, from the trouble itself, we will be healed. We will be saved. So now I mentioned already the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because both of these words, zera and tzara, remember, just to put this in context, we're trying to understand the juxtaposition of Tazria and tzaraat. And we see it's because the root words are very, very similar. And we can understand the juxtaposition here. And so this idea, going back to zera, of seed, that in one sense the two final letters spell ra, as in eitz hadat tov ra, but when reversed is er, is an awakening. So here we see another very deep connection, because both Tazria and tzaraat have to do with the skin. Where do we see that? Is because of the mitzvah of circumcision. Because when a woman conceives and gives birth to a male child, then in the parsha it says, on the 8th day, the child shall be circumcised. And so circumcision is cutting off the foreskin. And that is the sign of the covenant between God and the Jewish people. And so here we have a deep connection between the skin disease of tzaraat and the circumcision, which is cutting off the foreskin. They're both dealing with skin. So since we mentioned the eitz hadat tov ra, if remember, after they ate from the tree, Adam and Chava, it says that before that they were naked and they were not ashamed. And then, as soon as they ate from the tree, they knew that they were naked and they tried to cover themselves up. Later, it says that God made for them garments of skin, literally, or. And so it's explained that this idea of Adam and Chava being naked, that before they ate from the tree, they had what we relate to as light bodies. In other words, the whole incident in the Garden of Eden, we have to have a very wide consciousness to understand that the Adam and Chava that we're talking about were on a very, very high level, not just spiritually, but the physical reality of Adam and Chava was different than our reality now. And so what's called the fall in the Garden of Eden was really a fall from worlds. Adam and Chava were in a higher level of consciousness, and therefore their physical body manifests that. And so when it says that God gave them garments of skin, the word for skin in Hebrew is or, ayin vav resh, and the word for light is aleph vav resh, and they sound very similar. They're both or. And so it's understood that by eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they exchanged light bodies for bodies of skin. And so all of this goes into this idea of the juxtaposition of the beginning of the parsha and the vast majority of the parsha. Okay, now we're going to continue with a different insight, but connected to the purification process, because as we know, when a woman menstruates and sheds blood, so husband and wife separate, and then she goes through a week of what's called the clean days, where she's not seeing blood. And then she goes to the mikveh and is purified, and husband and wife reunite. And so here in the parsha, it says that after giving birth, well, it's not menstruation, but there is a shedding of blood. And so it says that she goes to a 7-day purification. And on the 8th day, the child is circumcised. So one of the explanations of the 7 days, now the 7 days are counted from the time that today in menstruation, after a woman no longer sees blood, it usually takes approximately 5 days. Then she has what are called the 7 clean days. And so the whole process of and the separation between husband and wife, these are called the laws of family purity. It's the absolute basis of a Jewish home. The question is, why the 7 days afterwards? So in some explanations, we know that when a person loses one of 7 close relatives, they go through a 7-day mourning period. And so the idea, just physiologically, that when a woman menstruates, so she sheds the blood and the egg that could have been fertilized. In other words, it could have led to conception and eventually to birth. But here, the egg and all of the material is cast out. And so the 7 days sometimes is compared to like a mourning period, because it could have brought life. But in our case, when a woman gives birth, so the question is, well, she just gave birth. So the 7 days can't be for the same reason. We can't use that same symbolism because she just gave birth. So it's not comparable to a mourning period because the possibility of birth did not happen. So the question is, why is there a 7-day period mandated? And so one of the ways to look at it is just a very simple idea that's brought in different poetry or songs or literature. The idea is, from the moment we're born, we begin an eventual trajectory to dying, because everything that is born, whether it's a vegetable or a fruit tree or anything in the vegetable kingdom or the animal kingdom or the human kingdom, anything that's born eventually dies. That's built into the system, from going back to the tzaraat tov v'ra. So here, the idea is that there's an acknowledgement that, of course, we're very, very happy. A new child is born, but there is an existential reality that goes along with it, that eventually this child will go the way of everyone else, will eventually pass away. So I just want to mention that one of, here I'm making like a spiritual connection. One of my favorite lines from a Bob Dylan song is, "He who is not busy being born is busy dying." That's such a rich metaphor. He who is not busy being born is busy dying. But here we have a physical reality to it. So that's one idea. And then we see that as part, again, this is at the time of the temple, that the woman goes through the original 7 days, and then for a male child goes through another 33 days of purification. And after the 40 days, then she brings a offering in the temple. But if it's a female that is born, the purification is an original 14 days, and then 66 days, double. The 14 is double 7, and the 66 is double 33. So again, everyone asks, why is that? Why is that? So if we just follow the logic that we've been saying up to now, is that everything that's born eventually dies. And if we go back to the story in the Garden of Eden, so when Chava, Eve, ate from the tree, we're told, originally God said, don't eat from the tzaraat tovarah, because on the day that you eat from it, you will die. And it turns out that they didn't die on the day they ate from it, but according to tradition, they brought death into this world. Like we said before, to understand this whole story on a deeper level, Adam and Chava were, as it were, existing in a higher world, a higher level of consciousness where there was no death. There was no death. But eating from the tzaraat tovarah brought death into the world. And so since it came through Eve eating, she gave it then to Adam, and Adam ate also, that this brought death into the world. So when symbolically, because the whole purification ritual is symbolic. And so here, that when a female was born, the purification process is double, because to remind us that Chava brought death into the world by eating from the tzaraat tovarah. It's to remind us of the existential reality and where it is coming from. But paradoxically, after they ate from the tree, so Adam named Chava. Until then, she was just called Isha, woman. And he named her Chava, and he gave a reason, because she was Aim Kol Chai. She's the mother of all living. And so here we see very, very paradoxically, that Chava brings death into the world, but she brings life into the world. Whether it's a male child or a female child, it's all coming through the woman. And so here we have the balance of life and death. And there's a beautiful connection here, because one of the so-called curses or results or consequences of Chava eating from the tree was, God said that when you give birth, it will be in lots of pain. That the birth pangs will not be simple. And so this goes along with the whole consequence from eating from the tree. So if you look at the word tzara, trouble, or here it can mean pain, like the birth pangs. So tzara is gematria 360. When we hear that number, many times we think of a circle, the 360 degrees of a circle. And so just to kind of bring all of this together in a circle is we see the circle of life and death here, especially through Chava. She's the mother of all life, and yet she's also the, we'll call it the agent through which death entered into the world as well. So the circle of life and death, life begins with tzaraat, with somewhat painful experience. It's a very joyous experience, but it's not pain-free. And leaving this world also, it can be like the sages say, like the dream type of death. They explain it's like picking a hair out of a cup of water, out of milk. In other words, it's gentle. It's not a violent death. It's not a traumatic kind of death. It's just a slow entry into another dimension, like pulling a hair out of a cup of milk. So here we see like the 360 degrees of life and death, of sickness and healing. They're all connected in a deep oneness. Chaim, everyone. Chaim. Okay, now for our our third insight here is we want to explore a little bit more about circumcision, because here it's mentioned really not in, it's just one verse. The whole story of circumcision goes back to Avraham, of course, and Parshat Lech Lecha. But here it's brought up again. So I want to delve a little bit into the idea of Brit Milah, of circumcision. So here we're going to start with the idea of the connection of circumcision and names. So the first 7 days of a boy's life, he has no name. We don't give the boy a name until the circumcision. And at the circumcision, right after the Brit Milah, then over a cup of wine and blessings, we give the baby a name. So here we see that the first 7 days, the baby has no name, and then is named. When we go back to Avram Avinu, we see that in a certain sense, his name is changed when he's commanded to do Brit Milah. Before Brit Milah, his name was Avram. When he goes through the circumcision as part of the instructions, God renames him Avraham. A hey is added to his name, and he becomes Avraham. So here we see, in a sense, his name that we know him by now and circumcision come almost together. Right in the beginning of the next parsha, the circumcision is at the end of Parshat Lech Lecha, which is the third parsha of the Torah. The beginning of the next parsha, which is the Yera, this begins where it says that God appeared to Avram, who was sitting at the opening of the tent. And it's explained by the sages that why is God coming to visit Avram now? Why is he appearing to him? Is we're told that this happened 3 days after the circumcision. Now remember, Avram was 99 years old at this point. So it wasn't a simple operation here. And on top of it, he did it to himself. So not so simple. So God, as it were, came to do what's called bikur cholim, to visit the sick. Is where we're told that the third day after, call it an operation, or after some kind of a traumatic healing, is always the hardest. The third day, everything kind of kicks in, and there's many times there's a lot of pain and discomfort. So God comes to visit. So, but in the beginning of the parsha, it doesn't say literally that God appeared to Avram. It just says, and God appeared to him. It does not name him there. And so Reb Shlomo talks extensively about this, the juxtaposition where Avram is just given a new name. This has tremendous significance, tremendous symbolism, that by adding the Hey to his name, he has a whole new identity here. And until this day, we're the children of Avraham. The name Avram isn't used again. So on one hand, the new identity that Avram has is wrapped up in the letters of his name. And yet when God comes to visit and appears to him in a vision, then he doesn't name, he just says he appears to him. So Reb Shlomo would explain that for all of us, there's a level where we have a name. The name is very important to who we are, where we're coming from, where we're going. But there's a certain level where we are more than just our name. And one of the places we see this is in Parsha Tazria, in the book of Shemot. This is the only portion where Moshe's name is not mentioned, where God addresses Moshe as you. In other words, direct, face-to-face, mouth-to-mouth relationship. And his name isn't mentioned, though God is speaking to Moshe. But in every other place it says, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. God said to Moshe, saying. But here it says he commands it in the language of you. So again, Reb Shlomo and everyone else actually points out that Moshe, the standard explanation is that at the golden calf, when all of that happened, and then Moshe pleads for God to forgive the people, and God is, in a sense, threatening to destroy the people and begin a whole new people with Moshe. And Moshe says, if you do such a thing, wipe me out of the book that you have written. In other words, I'll have no part of this. I can't be a part of this. You have to forgive the people. So we're told that anything that a tzaddik says has to be manifest in some level. So here, because Moshe said, wipe me out of your book, so we're told that it had to manifest in one way or another. So he's not mentioned in Parsha Tazria. But we'll call it a different, in a sense, a deeper meaning is that because Moshe was willing to give up his life, give up his portion in the Torah for the sake of the people, that he activated, he realized the place in his own soul that was above his name, Moshe. He reached a place that was beyond names. And it's the same thing with God. We have many names for God, Each one is important, is significant, is symbolic of different ideas and concepts and energies. But ultimately, God is above any name. And this is a very paradoxical idea, because especially with Hebrew, because we're told that God created the world through the Hebrew letters. And what we call an entity or a person or a thing or a place is the essence of what that person, place, or thing is. It's not just a symbolic letters for that entity. It is the actual life force, the animating energy of that thing or person or place that we're talking about. And so understanding names is the key to not only the whole Torah, but creation itself. But then there is a level that's beyond names. So names reveal, but they also limit. Once you put a name on something or someone, it limits them in a certain box, in a certain context. At the same time, since the Hebrew letters that make up a name is the animating force, so it reveals what the essence of this person, place, or thing is. So it's very, very paradoxical, this idea of the essence that is revealed through names and the essence that goes beyond names. So it's just interesting, going back to Abraham. So we're told the gematria of Abraham is 248. Before he received the Hay, and he was Avram, so it equals 243, 5 less. And so the sages ask, because there's a tradition that the number 248 is very, very significant, because we have 248 positive mitzvot. And according to the sages, we have 248 bones, major bones in our body. So those two things are very connected. The 248 bones of the body and the 248 positive mitzvot. So the sages ask, what was added to Abraham on a physical level that he didn't have when he was just Avram? So in other words, he gets a Hay to his name. Hay equals 5. So what was added to Avram? And so they say what was added to Avram was in the area of the 2 eyes, the 2 ears, and the sexual organ. And so I'm mentioning it here because, of course, the sexual organ is the place of circumcision. And so when he gets his new name, like we said before, it comes in conjunction with the command to circumcise himself. And so here we see that what's added to his name is also engraved, just like the circumcision is engraved in the body. So here, Avram, as it were, was missing something. And so going from Avram to Avraham gave him the eyesight to see farther than he had seen before. We mean spiritually. Ears to hear, meaning to understand what he couldn't understand up to then. And the sign of the covenant, which was engraved in his very, very being. So when a circumcision occurs and the foreskin is cut off, so the terminology is what is revealed. The tip of the sexual organ is called the atara, which means crown. It's the crown of the sexual organ, which is hidden as long as there's foreskin there. By cutting off the foreskin, it reveals the crown. So, of course, this is very significant because we know in the sfirot that the highest of all the sfirot is called the crown, is the keter. Torah is a different name for the same concept of keter. So here we see an amazing thing that runs through all of Judaism, and that is the connection between physical and spiritual. So here we see that not only just physical, but in human relations, the most physical of all acts really is the act of sexuality, of marital union, of intimate relations. It's the most physical. And yet here, the circumcision is revealing the crown, which is telling us, like we said in our first insight, that when you take the word zera, first it's Zayin Resh Ayin, which Resh Ayin is evil, but then when you turn it around, it becomes awaken. So when physicality is awake, then it can integrate spiritual energy, spiritual life force. And so here we see almost the ultimate union of physical and spiritual in the circumcision itself. Now we learn a very, very important thing about when it says that on the 8th day you shall circumcise. Now this also was mentioned, of course, when Avram was given the command for circumcision. But what we learn from that is that if a baby is born on Shabbat, and therefore the male will be circumcised in the following Shabbat, 8 days later, we might think, because the process of cutting the foreskin under ordinary Shabbat laws would not be permitted. So we're told that because it says that on the 8th day, meaning no matter when the 8th day is, even let's say it comes out in Yom Kippur, you would also do a circumcision on Yom Kippur. So in other words, the Brit Milah, just for those things that need to be done for the Brit Milah, supersedes Shabbat. So that's one of the things that we learn. Now the sages make a numerical comment when they look at the passage about circumcision. So they notice that the word brit is mentioned 13 times. 13 covenants. So that's what the sages say, that when Avram was commanded, it wasn't like a solitary one sentence explanation. It's a whole passage, all the laws of circumcision, and it mentions circumcision 13 times. So the sages say that God made 13 covenants with Avram. So what's very, very interesting here is that in what's called Mispar Katan, the numerical meaning of the reduced number of the word Bereshit. Bereshit is 913, 913. So those numbers are already reduced. So 9 and 1 and 3 equals 13. And so it's brought down that when God creates the world, in a sense, it's an act of covenant. It's an act of covenant. And where do we see that? We see it very beautifully in the permutation of the 6 letters of the word Bereshit in the beginning. If you permute the letters, it spells Brit Eish, a covenant of fire. And this is understood in modern terms that after the Big Bang, so we're told that the initial expansion of the, whatever it was, the speck of, we don't even know how to explain it really, we'll call it a speck of matter, which contained 10 billion universes, because everything comes from that. It's a seed. It's the tzaraat of creation. And from that seed comes the entire universe. But in the beginning, the universe was what Brian Greene, a great Jewish physicist, explains was exquisitely hot. Meaning it was so hot, it was like liquid. If you've ever seen like steel, they make steel, it's like molten. It's so hot that it's like a liquid. Well, the entire universe was so hot that nothing could form. No atoms, no particles, no quarks, no anything could, no elements, nothing could form. It was just pure energy. Brit Eish, a covenant of fire. And so there's a way to look at creation is God is making a covenant with all of creation. And we see the next time it's mentioned is with Noah, that God makes a covenant with Noah that he will not again destroy the world through water. And the sign of the covenant is the rainbow. So there, the word covenant is used not like with Avram, where it was a very personal covenant between God and Avram, meaning also the Jewish people for all eternity. But with Noah, it was more with nature. God made a covenant with nature not to destroy the world again through water. But there's a way to see the very inception of the universe is also a certain covenant. And again, we come to that because there are 13 times a covenant is mentioned from God to Avram with circumcision. And the reduced number of Bereshit is also 13. So that is a good place to stop. And we'll end with a blessing that, first of all, for anyone, we're going to go back to our first insight. For anyone who does need a healing, and of course, we want to dedicate and think about all of our hostages, all of our soldiers who have been injured, but to extend it to our learning group and people that we know, that everyone who needs a healing can be healed. And hopefully, whatever ails us, that somehow we could see it as a wake-up call, and we can make the proper fixings that we should all experience good health and the joy of good health that goes along with it.